same-sex marriage was legal in 37 states, plus the District of Columbia. The Supreme Court's decision now gave the right to marry to all Americans. Many LGBTQ plus people had been waiting for this moment for a long time. To see the Stonewall Inn, one might wonder what makes it so special. From the outside, it is not a particularly pretty establishment. Inside, the ceilings are low and the bar is dark. Why did so many New Yorkers celebrate there? Because almost 50 years earlier, something happened at Stonewall, something that would change the course of history for LGBTQ plus Americans. On June 28, 1969, police raided the Stonewall Inn and began arresting people. This had happened many times before, at Stonewall and at other gay-friendly bars in the city. But on that hot summer night, to the cops' surprise, the people at Stonewall fought back, and they fought back hard. I'm gonna read all these extra boxes at the end of the video. We'll keep it rolling, and I'll go back to the more important boxes. The struggle for equal rights for LGBTQ plus people did not begin at Stonewall, but the events there pushed the movement forward. Half a century later, Stonewall continues to inspire people to demand equality. Chapter 1: The Village. Stonewall is located in New York City's Greenwich Village neighborhood, commonly called the Village. Its winding streets and small parks set it apart from the rectangular street grid in the rest of the city. The Village has been a popular place for gay people to gather since the 1800s. Fof's was an underground saloon where gay men met, including the famous poet Walt Whitman. In the early 1900s, the Village was the center of New York's bohemian culture. Bohemian means to be unusual and accepting of those who are different. Poets, musicians, and other artistic types from around the city and the country flocked to the area. Some of these newcomers were queer. These people found more acceptance here than they did elsewhere. Still, many couldn't live an open life. Outside the Village, and even within it, they faced disapproval and discrimination. But queer culture blossomed nonetheless. Dazzling costume balls featuring drag queens were held across the Village and other downtown neighborhoods. The drag queen's a man who dresses and performs as a woman. From 1869 through the 1920s, drag balls were also held in the uptown African-American neighborhood of Harlem. When the United States entered World War I in 1917, American soldiers sailed to Europe from New York City. Many visited Greenwich Village before shipping off. Perhaps for the first time ever, they saw openly queer people. Many American women moved to cities like New York to fill the jobs left open by the soldiers. In these lively places, away from home and the pressure to marry and raise children, some women realized that they were gay. Meanwhile, queer American soldiers stationed overseas might have visited cities like Paris and Berlin, where queer culture was even more open than it was in New York. When they returned to the United States, some men began a new life, and many settled in the Village. A lesbian culture developed in cities like New York. Drag kings, or women who dressed and performed as men, appeared in nightclubs. Private apartment parties featuring dancing and jazz music became popular. Alelia Walker, a wealthy black heiress in Harlem, became famous for her legendary parties. Some were attended by European and African cross-dressing or dressing in the traditional clothing of the opposite sex was outlawed. After Prohibition ended in 1933, bars were required to have a liquor license from the state government, but the government wouldn't give licenses to bars that served queer people. After the good times of the Roaring Twenties came the Great Depression. Times were tough, and with nowhere left to go, queer people went back to living in the shadows. Chapter 2, Before. In 1950s America, gay people could be arrested for kissing or for holding hands in public. This behavior was against the law in all 50 states. Most Americans supported these laws. Sometimes police officers pretended to be gay in order to arrest gay people who asked them on dates. Newspapers published the names and addresses of people arrested for being queer. This was called being outed. As a result, a person might get fired, kicked out of their home, or worse. Outed people were forced to leave the armed forces. Gay people could not work for the U.S. government. It's not surprising that most queer people lived their lives in secret, in the closet. For a very long time, doctors claimed that homosexuality was a mental illness. They also believed that this disorder could be cured through psychotherapy. Some queer people were forced by their families into mental hospitals for treatment. Some doctors used horrible methods to try to make gay people straight. Male patients had their private parts removed in surgery. Others were given electric shocks and lobotomies, a kind of brain surgery. Lobotomies often resulted in severe brain damage and even death. I guess it was technically a surgery, but anyway. Today, procedures such as lobotomies are, for the most part, no longer accepted by the medical community. Some young LGBTQ plus people chose to run away from home rather than face such medical practices. Others were thrown out by their families. They flocked to queer-friendly neighborhoods in cities across the country: San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, Washington, D.C., and of course, New York City. Many gay and transgender kids in the village ended up on the streets. Some strutted around the neighborhood dressed in drag, carrying switchblades for protection. These newcomers met other people who understood their struggles. They made friends and created new families where everyone belonged. As LGBTQ plus youth moved to big cities, adult gay activists were raising awareness for gay rights. Harry Hay was a 38-year-old gay man in Los Angeles. He founded the Mattachine Society in 1950. The name came from a group of masked performers in medieval France who never revealed their identities. Mattachine was a kind of secret society for gay men. Members met in private homes. They closed the windows and drew the curtains. Only first names were used. They met to discuss the questions on many gay men's minds. Did something cause people to be gay? Why was it viewed so negatively? Could gay people ever lead happy lives? A few years later, the Daughters of Bilitis was founded by Del Martin and Phyllis Leon, a lesbian couple. It began as a social club for San Francisco lesbians, but the group soon became involved in education and politics. They published a monthly magazine called The Ladder. Local chapters of the Mattachine Society and Daughters of Bilitis began to open in cities across the country. They focused less on achieving equal rights and more on winning acceptance from general society. Sometimes the two groups worked together. Dr. Franklin Kameny, an astronomer for the U.S. Army, did not think their Mattachine Society in New York protested other injustices too. In New York, like many other states, bars that served disorderly customers could lose their liquor licenses. This law unfairly denied gay people the right to gather at bars. How? Gay people, by simply being gay, were considered disorderly. Some bars displayed signs that read, "If you're gay, go away." But for many, bars were the only places queer people could meet with other queer people. On April 21st, 1966, Craig Rodwell and two other Mattachine members decided to protest the law. They held a sip-in. They visited a number of New York bars with some reporters. Before asking for drinks, they declared themselves to be gay and said that they will remain orderly. A fourth Mattachine member joined them at Julius's, a gay-friendly bar in the village. Here, the bartender told the men, "You're gay, I can't serve you." The Mattachine Society filed a complaint. Their case went to court, and the next year the law was overturned. This was progress, but police harassment of gay bars and LGBTQ plus people continued. Chapter 3. Welcome to the Stonewall Inn. The Stonewall Inn on Christopher Street opened as a gay bar on March 18th, 1967. It was not a very nice place. There was no sink with running water to wash the glassware. Toilets often broke. The walls were painted black. A sheet of plywood blocked the windows. The bar itself was a toilet, said one Stonewall regular, but it was a refuge from the street. To get inside, patrons had to get past the bouncer. He had a view outside the sidewalk through a slit on the front door. Customers entered the bar's front room through a second set of doors. This room featured a black plywood bar, tables, and chairs. An older crowd gathered here. Younger patrons preferred the back room, where the jukebox played the latest hits. A racially mixed crowd of gay men, lesbians, drag queens, and trans people packed the dance floor. Same-sex dancing in public remained illegal in New York City until 1968. But at the Stonewall, that didn't stop people from cutting loose and having fun with friends. For all the sense of togetherness at Stonewall, the owner's interest in the bar was about one thing: money. Like most village gay bars at the time, it was run by the mafia, mobsters who operated in several big U.S. cities. Rather than get a liquor license, the Stonewall operated as a private bottle club. The liquor bottles behind the bar supposedly belonged to club members. The police knew this was only for show. Stonewall wasn't really a bottle club, but the owners bribed local cops to leave their place alone. The mafia also made money by blackmailing some of the Stonewall's wealthier patrons. "We know where you work," they'd say. "Pay up, or we'll tell everyone that you're gay." Desperate to keep their identity a secret, a group of important bankers paid the bribes. They got the money by making illegal business deals in foreign countries. This caught the attention of the police. Deputy Inspector Seymour Pine and Detective Charles Smith were ordered to shut down the Stonewall. Proving blackmail charges would be difficult, but proving Stonewall was not a real bottle club would be easy. On Tuesday, June 24th, 1969, the police raided the bar and arrested some of the staff. The illegal alcohol was taken as evidence. This would help the cops build their case. Patrons were very angry. Why were the cops raiding their special hangout? Still, the Stonewall reopened on Wednesday as if nothing had happened. Inspector Pine knew it would take more than one raid to shut down the bar for good. He planned a second one for Friday night. Nothing went according to plan. Chapter 4. Police were taking the place. Seymour Pine wanted his operation to go as smoothly as possible. He thought crooked local cops might warn the bar owners about the raid, so Pine enlisted the help of police officers from a different part of the city. 4 undercover officers, 2 men and 2 women, would go inside to observe the scene. They'd identify employees and cross-dressers for arrest and gather evidence to help prove their case that the bar didn't have a proper liquor license. Pine, Smith, and a couple of other officers in plain clothes would wait across the street in Christopher Park. Once the undercover officers reported back, everyone would go to the bar, flash their badges, and demand entry. Pine would call for backup, then begin to line people up to be arrested. Inside the bar, Seymour Pine and his officers were having trouble with the drag queens. Many of them were angrily resisting arrest. A number of lesbians were fighting back too. Cross-dressing was against the law, so women wearing men's clothes were subject to arrest. But these women would not go quietly. Back outside on Christopher Street, the crowd swelled. Passers-by, many of whom were queer, knew people inside. They stopped to see what was going on. Craig Rodwell was one of them. Rumors swirled that people inside the bar were being hurt by the police. When the police paddy wagon arrived to cart off those who'd been arrested, the crowd grew angry. The first to be loaded into the paddy wagon were the bar owners. Some people cheered that the mobsters were under arrest. Then out came the drag queens, kicking and screaming. But there wasn't enough room inside the paddy wagon for everyone. When it filled up, the cops began loading people into patrol cars. Eyewitness accounts vary on what happened next, but as the lesbians were removed from the bar, some officers struck the women and touched their private parts. One officer hit a lesbian in the head with a billy club. One woman was dragged out of the bar in handcuffs. She violently resisted the cops and refused to stay in the police car. For several minutes she fought back. Finally, she was lifted off the ground and thrown into the car. The brutality shocked the crowd. Bruised and bloodied, the women screamed at the assembled crowd, "Why don't you do something?" And then they did. Chapter 5, Uprising. For many in the crowd, their anger had been building for years. It was time to fight back. "Dirty coppers," people screamed as they pelted the police with copper pennies. Then came nickels and quarters, then glass bottles, cobblestones from the street, bricks from a nearby construction site. People ran through the streets telling others to join the fight. They called friends on payphones and said to get down to the village pronto. "Pigs," the crowd roared at the cops. They rocked the police cars and paddy wagon back and forth. They slashed tires. Craig Rodwell led a chant of "gay power." Seymour Pine ordered the police cars to flee the scene. That left him and 7 others to face off against the violent mob. It was as bad as any situation that I had met during the army, the World War II veteran later said. Pine's only choice was to retreat back into the Stonewall, then lock the doors and wait for backup. This further angered the crowd. Stonewall was theirs. How dare the cops occupy it? The hail of bricks and bottles continued, shattering the bar's glass windows. A team of drag queens and other men ripped a parking meter out of the sidewalk. They used it as a battering ram and busted the front door open. The crowd rained bottles and cans into the entryway. The cops managed to shut the front door and barricade it with furniture. Next, the protesters turned to fire. They poured cigarette lighter fluid into glass bottles. Then they lit the bottles and hurled them into the bar's windows. A trash can full of garbage was shoved in the bar's busted windows. arrested, there were beatings. By 4 a.m., the scene had finally calmed down. Incredibly, no one had died, and just 13 people were arrested. 7 of them were Stonewall employees. The exhausted protesters were amazed and overjoyed. They had fought back against the cops. Sure, their bar was badly damaged, but the cops had retreated. More importantly, everyone had come together. Black, white, brown, gay, lesbian, trans. We became a people, said one activist. All of a sudden, I had brothers and sisters. Chapter 6, Organizing. Eager to keep the protest going, Craig Rodwell and his partner, Fred Sargent, got to work. By Saturday afternoon, they had printed 5,000 copies of a pamphlet. Its title was Get the Mafia and the Cops Out of Gay Bars. The pamphlet encouraged queer people to stop going to mob-owned bars and to open their own instead. Not everyone was happy about the run-ins with police the night before. Some older gay people preferred not to rock the boat. The Mattachine Society wrote a message on the Stonewall's boarded-up windows pleading for peace and order. But as far as most people were concerned, there was no going back. The Stonewall had been destroyed. The cops had smashed all the liquor bottles, the jukebox, and the cigarette machine with baseball bats. Still, the bar reopened on Saturday. It was another scorcher, 95 degrees. That's like 40 Celsius, 38, 39 Celsius. People gathered outside to discuss maybe 40, 42 maybe. People gathered outside to discuss the events of the night before, coming together out in the open, organizing. The cops returned too, telling folks to break it up and keep it moving. Instead, the Stonewall patrons held hands and kissed. More chants rose up. Liberate the street. They blocked traffic, rocking cars back and forth. Christopher Street belongs to the Queens. The demonstrations lasted until about 2 or 3 a.m. Over the following nights, an uneasy peace settled over the village. What would happen next? The 4th of July was just days away. Time for the annual Reminder March in Philadelphia. Craig Rodwell chartered a bus, and several dozen New Yorkers joined him. In all, nearly 150 people attended, the largest such gathering yet. Major newspapers had largely ignored the Stonewall events, so Rodwell spread the word to reporters that LGBTQ+ people had declared their independence. Some protesters broke the long-standing rules and held hands as they picketed, but Rodwell didn't care. He now hoped for a new annual march, one that would take place on the anniversary of the uprising. Groups advocating for LGBTQ+ rights sprang up left and right. Frank Kameny, founder of the Washington, D.C. Mattachine chapter, said, "By the time of Stonewall, we had 50 to 60 gay groups in the country. A year later, there were at least 1,500. 1 month after Stonewall, more than 500 people gathered at Washington Square Park in the heart of the village. They had heard speeches and celebrated the progress already made. Then they marched to the Stonewall. Up till that time, it was the largest public gathering of LGBTQ+ people in American history. The Christopher Street Gay Liberation Day March was scheduled for June 28, 1970, 1 year after Stonewall. Similar marches were planned in Boston, Chicago, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. Craig Rodwell's vision for a new annual reminder was coming into focus. The New York March would start in the village and go all the way to Central Park, about 3 miles away. Organizers printed maps showing where public payphones and restrooms were located. They provided tips for safety and for keeping the peace. The mood was tense as the march began. Please let there be more than 10 of us, one marcher remembered thinking. How many people would be brave enough to proclaim their identity in such a public way? And it was anyone's guess what would happen once they left the safety of the village. As the marchers made their way uptown, people along the sidewalks joined them. They chanted 2, 4, 6, 8, gay is just as good as straight, and 3, 5, 7, 9, lesbians are mighty fine. I agree. People were not only demanding equal rights, they were saying they were proud of being gay. Soon there were thousands HIV is a virus that attacks the immune system. The immune system is the body's natural defense against illness. If untreated, HIV can turn into AIDS. AIDS makes a person's body so weak it can no longer fight off infections. HIV/AIDS is a sexually transmitted disease. It can also be spread by using unclean hypodermic needles, so drug users are at risk. AIDS can affect anyone, not just LGBTQ+ people. But at first it was almost only gay men who were dying from the disease. People know a lot about AIDS today, including how to prevent one person from passing it to another. And those living with AIDS can manage their symptoms with medications. But in 1981, no one knew AIDS existed. That spring, seemingly healthy gay men around the country began to fall ill. Purple spots appeared on their bodies. They experienced horrible night sweats. They lost a lot of weight. Common colds developed into serious cases of pneumonia, and no one was getting better. In response to this disaster, the Gay Men's Health Crisis, or GMHC, was founded in New York in 1982. GMHC volunteers provided care for people living with AIDS. It soon grew to become the nation's largest gay organization. GMHC published newsletters and sent them to doctors and hospitals across the country, and worked to educate the queer community about the disease. In 1986, the GMHC held its first annual AIDS Walk, raising more than $700,000 for HIV/AIDS research. 30 years and 30 walks later, $150 million had been raised. More than 50,000 Americans had AIDS by the end of 1987. Only 2,000 had survived. By 1992, more than 250,000 Americans had AIDS. The annual Pride March began to feel more like a funeral procession for all these lost friends. Not until 1987, after so many had died of the disease, did President Ronald Reagan mention AIDS in public. During his presidency, funding for scientists trying to find a cure Davis is an out lesbian who now hosts a beloved daily talk show watched by millions. Well, not anymore, but she did. Ellen came out in 1997 on the cover of Time magazine along the headline, "Yep, I'm gay." At the time, she starred in her own TV sitcom. 2 weeks later, Ellen's character on the show came out. 44 million tuned in. Will and Grace was a TV comedy that aired from 1998 to 2006, and it returned in 2017. The show starred 2 openly gay men in its cast of characters. It was a top-rated sitcom for years. In 1993, an openly gay drag queen named RuPaul took the world by storm with the dance hit Supermodel, You Better Work. 3 years later, Ru hosted a talk show on VH1 that ran for 100 episodes. He's hosted RuPaul's Drag Race, a popular reality TV competition for drag queens since 2009. The American public's views on LGBTQ plus people have changed a great deal. In 1996, the year before Ellen came out, just 27% of Americans supported same-sex marriage. By 2017, that number had grown to 64%. At the time, Vice President Joe Biden made headlines in 2012 by supporting same-sex marriage. I think Will and Grace probably did more to educate the American public than almost anything anybody's ever done so far, he said. People fear that which is different. Now they're beginning to understand. As many as 3 million children in the United States are being raised by LGBTQ plus parents. While they may still face discrimination and bullying, acceptance of these families has also risen over time. And in 2016, a Supreme Court ruling legalized adoption by same-sex parents nationwide. That same year, President Barack Obama spoke about the changing times when he presented Ellen DeGeneres with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. It's easy to forget now, when we've come so far, just how much courage was required for Ellen to come out on the most public of stages almost 20 years ago. That's so true. You kids have no idea. The world has indeed come a long way, from pro sports stars like Olympic figure skater Adam Rippon and basketball player Jason Collins to our elected leaders. Queer people are more out and proud than ever before. Anise Parker was Houston, Texas's first openly lesbian mayor for 6 years. Kate Brown of Oregon was the nation's first openly bisexual governor. In 2017, Virginia's Danica Roem became the first openly transgender person elected to state government. And in 2018, voters in Colorado elected Jared Polis, the nation's first openly gay senator. Chapter 9, The Struggle Continues. After the Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage in 2015, some officials in the South refused to give marriage licenses to same-sex couples. Kim Davis, a country clerk in Kentucky, said she was acting under God's authority. She was eventually jailed for 5 days. Some states have passed laws allowing businesses to refuse services to LGBTQ plus people if doing so goes against the owner's religious beliefs. These anti-LGBTQ plus laws will be challenged in the courts, just as they have been since the 1960s. Many LGBTQ plus children still experience rejection at home, at school, and at their places of worship. Some are kicked out by their families, others run away. About 40% of homeless youth are LGBTQ plus, a very high proportion. LGBTQ plus kids are also 5 times more likely to attempt suicide than their straight peers. Kids, I'm here for you. It's gonna be okay, I promise you. I love you all. The LGBTQ plus community also continues to face terrible violence. This might be upsetting, just so you know, we're gonna talk about some terrible violence. One night in 2016, a gunman opened fire at Pulse, an Orlando, Florida nightclub. Pulse was popular with LGBTQ plus Latin people and their friends. Like the Stonewall Inn, Pulse was a very special place for the local queer community. It was supposed to be a safe space to gather and have fun. 49 people were killed that night. In 2017, 29 transgender people, most of them non-white women, were murdered nationwide, the most ever recorded at the time. In 2017, there were 52 hate-based homicides, the deadliest year for LGBTQ plus people on record. Despite the dangers and challenges, the world has changed for the better since Stonewall. Many organizations have formed to help LGBTQ plus youth. save lives by preventing suicides among young people. LGBTQ plus adults, many of them famous, shared their childhood stories online. They promised viewers that while life as an LGBTQ plus kid can be really hard, it really does get better. The videos on the It Gets Better website have been viewed more than 50 million times. It really does, kids, I promise you. On June 24th, 2016, President Barack Obama made history by dedicating the Stonewall Inn, Christopher Park, and the surrounding streets and sidewalks as the Stonewall National Monument. It was the first time a national landmark to honor LGBTQ plus history has been established. I believe our national park should reflect the full story of our country, he said, that we are stronger together, that out of many we are one. Alright, let's go back and read some of the relevant boxes. I'm going to skip any that might be a little upsetting or don't actually have to do with, I guess, Pride Month, but let's start with this one. What does it mean to be LGBTQ plus, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, etc.? Love and identity would make someone who they are take many forms. Lesbian is a woman whose physical, romantic, emotional attraction is to other women. The word lesbian comes from the Greek island of Lesbos, where the poet Sappho lived and wrote about the beauty of women. Gay means people who are physical, romantic, emotional attractions are to people of the same sex. Gay people, both gay men and lesbians, have also been referred to as homosexual, but that term's considered aggressive and a bit offensive today. And straight people are heterosexual. Bisexual, yeah, that's me. Someone who forms physical, romantic, emotional attractions to more than one gender. Transgender, people whose gender or how they feel on the inside and how they express themselves is different from the sex, male or female, that they had or were assigned when they were born. Some trans people decide to undergo surgery or other medical treatment so their outward appearance matches their true self. I love trans people. You're also welcome here. So welcome here. Queer. Once considered an offensive term, some people have reclaimed it to refer to any identity that is not strictly heterosexual. Some queer people prefer to be called they instead of he or she. Then there are some people, the plus, who don't feel that any of these categories fully describe them. In 2016, an estimated 10 million Americans, about 4% of the population, identified as LGBTQ+. Strike pose. The 1980s saw the rise of a new kind of ball in Harlem, the Vogue ball. Voguers part walked, part danced down a runway. They moved their hands and arms in dramatic and expressive ways. They also dropped into beautiful or difficult poses to show how athletic they were. In some ways, it is similar to breakdancing. Sometimes Voguers competed in downtown New York clubs. It was there that pop icon Madonna was inspired to write her best-selling song, Vogue. If you want to see this in action, please watch Paris is Burning. It's a great documentary about that culture. Being out in the workplace today. In many places today, it is still legal to fire people or refuse to hire them because they are LGBTQ+. The Employee Non-Discrimination Act, is a bill that has come before Congress many times and would make it illegal nationwide for employers to discriminate against anyone because of their gender or identity. It has never become law. As for the military, an 1893 law called Don't Ask, Don't Tell, or DADT, finally allowed gay people to serve in the armed forces as long as they kept their sexuality a secret. In 2010, the U.S. Congress and President Barack Obama decided to end DADT. In 2017, President Donald J. Trump announced the military would no longer allow transgender people to serve, but of course his policy is being challenged in the courts and it's never actually happened. I'm going to skip this one about conversion therapy. It's kind of upsetting. For some, I don't want to trigger anyone. And as important as the civil rights movement is, we're going to just talk about gay activism, like Craig Rodwell's historic bookstore. Also, sorry if you've heard my cat crying at the door. He wants me to go play with him, but he's going to have to wait. Sorry, kitty. Born in Chicago, Kardashian moved to the village in 1966. Marcia said the P stood for pay it no mind. A transgender black woman, Marcia dressed in both men's and women's clothing and modeled for the gay pop artist Andy Warhol. The so-called Queen of Christopher Street, Johnson, was among the first to resist arrest at Stonewall. Sylvia Rivera was a transgender Latina drag queen from New York City. She was reportedly among the first to throw a bottle at the cops. "It's the revolution," she screamed. In 1970, along with Marsha P. Johnson, she founded Star House to provide shelter for gay and trans kids living on the streets. Sorry about my upstairs neighbor. Stormy Delavery was born in New Orleans, Louisiana, to an African-American mother and a white father. Stormy was a lesbian who sang and performed as a drag king. Some say Stormy threw the first punch at Stonewall. "The cop hit me and I hit him back," she recalled. Stormy considered herself a protector of the village lesbians. She patrolled the neighborhood into her 80s. Donut Wars. Stonewall was not the first time LGBTQ plus people fought back. Cooper Donuts in Los Angeles was a popular 24-hour hangout for gay men, drag queens, and trans people. In 1959, police raided the diner and arrested 5 people. Everyone poured into the street. They hurled donuts, coffee mugs, and trash at the police. The cops fled, but returned with backup to beat and arrest a number of rioters. Now my neighbor's stomping and my cat's crying. He wants to go run around in the hallways outside in our apartment building. It's his favorite thing to do. But we're gonna finish this first. Worldwide Pride. Today, LGBTQ plus Pride marches are held across the globe. Cities in Germany celebrate Christopher Street Day, named in honor of Stonewall. The city of Sao Paulo, Brazil, set a world record in 2009 when 4 million people attended its Pride Parade. But not all events ended happily. Pride marches in Moscow were met with anger and violence. In 2012, a Russian court banned gay celebrations for 100 years. Pride events in Istanbul, Turkey attracted 100,000 people in 2014. By the next year, the event had been outlawed. When people still gathered, police fired rubber bullets and water cannons at them. Then there are some places in the world where you won't see a pride parade anytime soon. Homosexual behavior is still outlawed in many countries across Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia. In some of these places, being LGBTQ+ is punishable by death. World Pride is a global event that has been held in different cities around the world since 2000. In 2019, New York will host World Pride to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall uprising. And Harvey Milk. One of the first openly gay politicians was a man named Harvey Milk. Born in a small New York town, Milk knew he was gay by high school, but he kept his personal life private until much later. Harvey moved to San Francisco in 1972 and opened a camera shop in the Castro neighborhood. He became involved in the gay community. He was known as the mayor of Castro Street. In 1977, he was elected to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. Tragically, on November 27, 1978, Harvey Milk was shot and killed by Dan White, a disturbed former coworker. White had assassinated George Moscone, the San Francisco mayor, just moments before. The murders were partly over a dispute about a gay rights law which White opposed. Before his death, Milk had spoken about the importance of coming out of the closet and living openly. "If a bullet should enter my brain," he said, "let that bullet destroy every closet door." Maybe next year's Pride video will be about Harvey Milk. Maybe I'll go back to the GLBT Museum in San Francisco to show you the coat he wore when he was assassinated and Castro Street and all that stuff. Maybe. Alright, let's look at these pictures. This is a queer picket outside the White House in 1965. Here's the Sip-In by the Mattachine Society. The Stonewall uprising here. And the sign the Mattachine Society left, it says, "We homosexuals plead with our people to please help maintain peaceful and quiet conduct on the streets of the village, Mattachine." And we've got some people partying outside Stonewall here. All the damage done. You can see the bashed up crazier. And the 1971 march. And the 1973 march. That's Craig Rodwell. Okay, he's good. There's Harvey Milk. And George Moscone, rest in peace. This is at New York Pride 1983. Larry Kramer founded ACT UP. There's a box later about the silence equals death movement. And the 1994 Pride flag covering the street here. This is the AIDS quilt. There'll be a box about this too. This is, I remember this day. This was Del Martin and Phyllis, I think it was Phyllis Lyon actually, being the first gay couple to be married in San Francisco. There's Gavin Newsom. Literally just one morning he announced, oh, gay marriage is legal in the city, and he started marrying people like crazy that morning. Everyone was going nuts. And then the government of California had to shut it down because it was still illegal in the state. You just like went rogue that day. And for like 4 days straight, Gavin Newsom was just marrying gay people at City Hall. It was crazy, but in a good way. Stonewall being declared a national monument. Newlyweds outside Stonewall. And this is outside Stonewall, but it's a memorial for the victims of the Pulse shooting. Here's Ellen getting her Presidential Medal of Freedom. There's Mama Rue getting their star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And there's Danica Roma being elected to the state office of Virginia. The first transgender person elected to state office. Let's read about the AIDS Memorial Quilt. In June 1987, San Francisco activist Cleve Jones joined with others to create the Names Project Foundation. They began sewing squares to make a quilt honoring friends who had died from AIDS. Soon, people around the country started sending their own squares and panels. By October, the quilt was publicly displayed on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. With nearly 2,000 pieces, it was bigger than a football field. More panels were added the following year. As the quilt toured the country, it raised money to help those living with AIDS. The quilt now features nearly 50,000 panels and weighs more than 50 tons. Here's Silence Equals Death. ACT UP's motto was Silence Equals Death. It appeared under a pink triangle symbol. During the Holocaust and World War II, Nazi Germany arrested 100,000 people for the crime of being gay. 15,000 were sent to concentration camps. To identify them as gay people, they were made to wear pink triangles on their camp uniform. And as many as 60% of these prisoners died. So yeah, that's the logo of ACT UP. Here's the rainbow flag. Perhaps the most recognizable symbol of the LGBTQ plus community is the rainbow flag, also known as the Pride flag. Each color symbolizes something: red for life, orange for healing, yellow for sunlight, green for nature, blue for peace, and purple for spirit. The flag was designed in 1978 by Gilbert Baker, a friend of Harvey Milk's. In 1994, Baker organized the creation of a mile-long rainbow flag, the largest in the world, to commemorate the 25th anniversary of Stonewall. I'm actually going to skip this box about Matthew Shepard because it's a little upsetting, but this poor fellow, rest in peace. He was very brutally murdered, so I'm not going to read the details. But let's finish with Lady Gaga, Born This Way. Many other celebrities have expressed their love and support for the LGBTQ plus community. Pop superstar